Fire and ice have shaped this landscape. Heat from the Earth's core is the underlying force. Glaciers did the rest of the work. For a creation that is unique the world over. A string of 4 lakes on a high plain, framed by steep peaks. As a glaciologist, ice is Felix Keller's profession. The physical activity that goes hand in hand with research excursions helps him compensate for endless hours of desk work.
What's particularly interesting about this landscape is that we are located at the continental divide between Africa and Europe. To the back left, we have Africa. In terms of plate tectonics, we call it the Central Eastern Alps, or Southern Alps. The spot where we are standing right now is already Europe. The scientific term is Penninic Napus.
The landscape of the Lungim Pass, high above the Lake District, looks almost volcanic. A sculpture garden created by nature from various types of stone. The remains of primordial transformation activity and surging with immense energy.
We need to keep in mind that this was part of the ocean some 300 million years ago. This spot was in the middle of the ocean, and then Africa decided to move toward Europe. The continents collided and the top layers were carried away far north. The converging plates warped into folds as they were pushed higher and higher. This process gave rise to considerable pressure and the high temperatures that reshaped or metamorphosed the rocks, as geologists would say, and also changed their color.
Greenstone is a particularly rare and fascinating remnant of this powerful continental drifting. The surface initially radiates reddish hues. This stone has oxidized.
What is plainly visible here is that the rock was pushed in one direction. It has become highly foliated. This is the direction from which most of the pressure came, and where the schistosity is visible. The rock layers easily split off along smooth parallel plates, layer for layer, just like flaky pastry.
Felix Keller discovers another attraction right next to the green stone. The glitter particles in this stone are tiny grenades.
This is a real gemstone from which jewelry can be made. This one would be too small, but it's an object of interest nonetheless.
There's a tourist attraction on the Lungim Pass that draws cyclists and hikers 2,600 meters up the mountain, one of the world's few triple watersheds. When a drop of water falls here, it has 3 possibilities. It can flow into the North Sea, the Adriatic Sea, or the Black Sea. If it happens to flow north, it ends up in the North Sea via the Gelge and Rhine rivers. If it drifts westwards, it will flow into the Mediterranean via Lake Como and the Po River. With a bit of luck, the drop will float in an easterly direction, because then it winds up in Lake Lungim, and from there into the river that gives all of Engadine its name. The N River, as it's known in Rheto-Romanic. We know it as the Inn River. Before it eventually flows into the Danube and then continues on to the Black Sea, it passes through 4 large Engadine lakes. 10 square kilometers of water, located 1,800 meters above sea level. Europe's highest shipping line operates from these lakes. Captain Franco Gianni shuttles between Sils and Maloja 4 times daily, together with his daughter-turned-sailor Francesca. After over 40 years of service, the captain, who hails from Italy, is familiar with every cadence of the typically turbulent Maloja wind and the lake's every mood swing.
The water is grey in fog. It's light blue in nice weather, and northerly winds make it look blue. Really, really blue. Just stunning.
When Franco and Francesca travel across the lake on rainy days, the landscape surrounding them seems to take on human features.
I often look over to the mountains. If you look over there, you can see a sleeping woman. There she is, lying on her back. Each mountain face looks different. When it rains, it's always different than when the sun is shining. It affects my mood too. It's like being in the middle of the lake. You have no choice but to plow forward. The fear that grips me there is something I've gotten used to in the meantime. The lake is what drives me. There was a terrible storm once and the seats went overboard. I lost them all. What else could I do? I just accepted it.
For him, the abrupt changes in weather are at the root of all kinds of myths. Throwing a stone into the lake, very risky. It could hit and anger a dragon. According to legend, a monster dwells at the bottom of the lake. When it feels annoyed, it roars and grumbles and can be pretty unpleasant. Under cover of darkness, as the legend goes, the dragon comes ashore to look for a victim that it can pull into the lake. Only then can it find peace again. Once the dew is lifted, the fragrance of the flowers is particularly intense. The lake's varied scenery, with creeks, moors and alluvial plains, offers an ideal habitat for numerous animal and plant species. As soon as the sun rises, the chalices open up to the sky to reveal their captivating splendor. Jan Luna calls himself a flower and pleasure wanderer. He loves springtime in the mountains, especially early in the morning. He's familiar with black and red vanilla orchids and knows all the eccentric blossom forms, the long-stemmed ones and short-stemmed ones, or the plushy, colorful ones, and those with dense hair that protects them from the sun. The superstars, like the Turk's cap lily, gentian in all its varieties, anemones of all kinds. Jan was involved in a plant identification app called Flora Helvetica. In the first days of July, the Alpine rose is already all but withered. The symbol of an intact Alpine world, Edelweiss blossoms earlier than usual. An immigrant, Edelweiss came from Central Asia at the end of the last ice age. As temperatures in the Alps rose, it withdrew to cooler, inaccessible hiding places in the rocks.
Finding Edelweiss in the rocks was so unusual that it became the ultimate challenge for many, a test of will that one accepted for love. The Edelweiss is, after all, a symbol of love. And love is something that you should have to work for.
Not every young sweetheart got her Edelweiss, and some dares ended in a plunge down the mountain. Marsh orchids growing in a raised bog spot above the lake. Eating plants that thrive on such highly acidic soil has unpleasant consequences for horses, donkeys and goats, so they avoid the moor for grazing, and this helps protect the sensitive landscape.
Special species of animals live here. It's primarily insects and frogs that can live in this acidic soil environment. There are very few plants that grow exclusively in acidic soil. So we are very aware that we need to devote our attention to the diversity here.
Für uns in dieser Vielfalt sind wir uns dessen bewusst, dass wir dem Acht schenken müssen.
But even at this altitude, true experts see much more than barrenness. Carthusian pink, cobweb house leek, bluish saxifrage.
The biggest rock is powerless against moisture and extreme temperatures, which can cause it to shatter. Mother Nature devised this ingeniously, so small and fragile, and yet so powerful.
For the longest time, Glacier Buttercup, located at some 4,000 meters above sea level, held the altitude record. That is, until it was dethroned by two types of saxifrage. When the glacier recedes, it exposes grey, desolate bedrock, which is first colonized by lichens and mosses. Then pioneer plants move into this space, creating the humus for everything that comes after them. More and more often, melting glaciers are what is responsible for changes in the flora and fauna. Daniel Godley is a ranger high above the Lake District. Today he's greeted by the yawning emptiness of his nature district. Just a few marmots can be seen flitting around where Switzerland's largest Alpine ibex population should be grazing. A study conducted here showed that not just reptiles and insects, but also warm-blooded creatures are reacting to rising temperatures by moving onto higher elevations. But at least during springtime, the ibex still ventures far down into the valley.
They go all the way down to the edge of the village, to the cultivated grass pastures just a few meters above the houses. Now that it's gotten so warm, they climbed higher. They always follow fresh grass.
Higher springtime temperatures, an earlier snowmelt, and thus a better food supply. For the time being, the ibex is benefiting from climate change. But what will happen if the temperatures keep rising?
We have to take a look. They're out there somewhere. I can recognize some, but not all. That's not true. But I do recognize individual ones very well. Older ones or those with strange features. Something irregular or something very regular. Those I recognize. But with 1,800 animals, you can't know them all.
At one point, it might not be possible for cold-loving animals and plants to climb any higher. This is the so-called nowhere-to-go effect. And then even the Alpine ibex will be threatened. Temperatures are on the rise all around the Lake District. In fact, noticeably more than the global trend. In Sils Maria, the temperature over the past 100 years rose between 0.5 and 1.7 degrees Celsius. What effect will this have on sensitive biotopes? The bog at Maloja is one of Europe's highest. Its formation is down to the retreat of glaciers following the last ice age. The very extraordinary mountain pine grows here. Their seeds are able to germinate on stony ground, and they can grow either upright or prostrate. Since bogs regenerate very slowly, they are in acute danger. 90% of the raised bogs in Switzerland have already been destroyed. Felix Keller, the ice researcher, also knows of some other relics from the last ice age in Maloja. As the ice melted, the meltwaters rushed through the glacier via cracks, all the way to the bedrock, where it accelerated enormously. Fast rotating vortexes, 200 kilometers an hour, formed. The water milled its way through the bedrock, centimeter for centimeter.
We have to keep in mind that if we had witnessed this incredible water spectacle from right here, we would have been under a layer of ice, 300 to 500 meters thick. The water would have plunged down here from high above us with force behind it that would be hard to bear.
And there's something else about the Inn Glacier that fascinates Felix Keller. During the Ice Age, there were two equally large ice streams here that flowed apart diametrically. One rose from St. Moritz upward in a southerly direction. The Lake District owes its existence to this slight gradient, traces of which are apparently visible even underwater. Proof of the glacier's upward movement can apparently be found on a rock face deep below lake sills. According to Keller, these marks look like they were hewn by man, but are actually glacial grooves that were gouged into the rock by the former glacier. So there are in fact monuments to Earth's history in lake sills. But you can also find surprising trout species there. In addition to graylings, Scardinius hesperidicus, Arctic char, and minnows. But these make themselves very scarce. And even fishermen, like Fadri Pedroon, don't know what the Salmo labrax, a Black Sea salmon that is very rare in these climes, actually looks like. For the time being, their fishing tails lack fish.
Over the past years, we started to fish in deeper depths. You put a weight on the fishing line. 3 kilos of lead allow you to fish practically at the bottom of the lake. But this basically entails zigzagging across the lakes by boat all day long. It's very strenuous.
The fishermen were curious when researchers recently examined the lake. The lake's quality was praised effusively. It has good oxygen content, practically pollution-free water, and plenty of fish. While angling in the service of science, the researchers even encountered a trout that is usually only found in the Danube's drainage area. Whether or not this trout actually traveled upstream along the Inn River hasn't been determined thus far. More than anything else, researchers were delighted to see that, unlike in other lakes where rare fish species have become genetically mixed beyond recognition, this is not the case in lake sills. Here, the black sea trout are more likely to stay amongst themselves. He doesn't know whether the genetic makeup of his catch points to a black sea trout. The difference between it and a normal trout can only be determined in a lab. The ecologically intact shoreline is something that the researchers recognized as very unique. It's a biotope for waterfowl, insects, and amphibians. With a bit of luck, wanderers can find a very peculiar object along the shoreline. Every autumn, the water, waves, and Maloja winds form these extraordinary happenstance creations. Prickly balls made out of larch tree needles. The so-called Silserkugeln have always sparked the imagination of locals. In times when nature posed a constant threat to people's survival, their minds also sensed the presence of mystical figures in the woods. Danger lurked everywhere, even apart from bears and wolves. It was the dark forces that sent storms, crop failures, and famines. According to legend, however, there were also benevolent, so-called wild little people who intervened on their behalf. During a particularly devastating famine, the wild little people apparently filled up the large needle balls with fish, eggs, and dried fruit. The Silserkugeln are rare finds in summer. If you know what you're looking for, however, you might get lucky along the flat beaches of Chastei Peninsula.
You have to keep in mind that 300 to 400 years ago, mysticism played a larger role in people's lives, and such legends were widely believed. People believed they contained pearls or other very precious things, like pieces of gold. And it wouldn't be a fairy tale if a Silserkugel didn't occasionally come with a message of love. But you can't open them all to look inside, as then none would be left.
The Chastei Peninsula is located just off the town of Sil's alluvial plains, and is Jan Klaluna's favourite stretch for walking. Looking at it from above, the sparse, large forest looks like it's been splashed in saturated green. But these days, plant expert Jan Klaluna feels obliged to reassure horrified guests that the forest isn't dying. It's just moths. They infest larch trees every 7 or 8 years. The larch tortrix feasts on larch needles and leaves behind a withered-looking tree. Excrement and dead caterpillars cover the forest floor. The branches of the usually so proud tree look cocooned.
This is just another swarm year. The larch trees on some of the Engadine Valley's flanks have already turned brown in mid-July. Don't worry though, next year you'll have green and golden larch trees again that will stay green in summer.
Thanks to these beneficial organisms, they will once again sport short, firm needles. At one time, the Chastei Peninsula also attracted another wandering philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who spent 7 consecutive summers here. This is where he found a cure to his nervous disorder and finally regained the strength to write his magnum opus. I awoke from a deep dream. The world is deep and deeper than day has ever comprehended, Nietzsche wrote in Zarathustra. Known as the recluse of Sils Maria, he hiked for up to 7 hours a day. At a boulder, one that was perhaps once a ritual power stone and is now known as the Nietzsche Rock, Nietzsche was overcome by the idea of eternal recurrence. "The Engadine has returned me to life," he wrote. This panorama also drew the likes of Marc Chagall, Albert Einstein, and Thomas Mann. The legendary Grand Hotel Waldhaus was their abode of choice. Dennis Brunner is the hotel's chef de cuisine. He loves locally sourced products and is looking for wild herbs. For this, he must leave the Lake District and drive to Bergell behind the Maloja Pass. A different landscape, a different season. It's summertime in Solihull, and the village in this tri-border area has a distinctly Italianate charm. Rilke once also stopped by here. In 2015, it was designated as Switzerland's most beautiful spot. Permission was granted to mow the meadows at the village entrance for a second time. That's because a real delicacy grows here, caraway. Not only is it a rich source of essential oils that promote digestion, according to an old folk belief, caraway also banishes bad spirits.
Hundreds of people walk by here and waste no thought to the fact that something edible might be growing here. Most are familiar with it only from the supermarket or ready-made meals on their plates. It's mind-boggling to think of all the things that grow here in nature. Not just wild caraway plants, but also achillea, more commonly known as yarrow, which grows just about everywhere, and stinging nettle, and so much more.
The caraway seed is ripe. Dennis can discern a delicate violet stripe on the seed capsule.
It already diffuses more aroma than the normal caraway that one buys. Tastes ridiculously good.
Aromas that tickle the nose, a firework of colours. Summers in the Alps are short, but spectacular. Glaciologist Felix Keller is once again looking for a physical challenge at the Maloja Pass as he fights his way 200 meters up the steep mountain pass. "22 curves, 13 hairpin bends among them, need to be navigated. An old mule track leading across the Maloja has existed here from early times. The wheel grooves that Felix Keller can still distinctly make out evolved atop rock steps in the 1st century AD. Gradients of 30% needed to be overcome.
Actually, these cart tracks go back to Roman times. So-called mountain carts were used to get over the mountain on narrow-gauge tracks. An incredible achievement to overcome this escarpment.
To the sides, you'll find 6 artificial holes, whose purpose is not quite clear.
I assume these holes tell us that a large number of strong men alone were not enough. The carts were likely blocked intermittently using side rods so that the men could reposition themselves. Getting up these steep steps was really quite difficult.
Once the Roman legions completed the ascent, they found themselves just like us on an Alpine plateau. Oddly, the path doesn't descend once you go beyond the pass. That too is a consequence of the collision of Africa and Europe. As the plates came into contact with each other, it caused a so-called strike-slip fault. It's what shaped this landscape. Beyond Maloja, on an alluvial cone that protrudes into Lake Sils, is a broad river delta, which the Fedots River deposited over the course of millennia. Only a few houses are located here, along with the goats of Vreni Kadurish. The goats are a local breed known as Grison striped. Usually they climb high up into the Fedots Valley and only come down to be milked. Today, the weather isn't good enough for them.
We added a few Saanen goats so that we can see the entire herd better. They're not actually purebred Saanen goats, however. In this case, their mothers were Saanen goats, while the father was a Grison striped. In the first and sometimes even second generation, their white colour stays dominant, but they are no longer thoroughbred. When you're looking for the goats somewhere up in the rocks, in the Alpine rose bushes, You practically can't see the dark ones at all, but you can see the 5 white ones immediately. And then you also know where the rest of the herd is. It makes them so much easier to find.
The Grison striped goat is a rare mountain goat. They like to climb, and they even produce milk if it's been cold for a few days.
This is a very young animal without much experience. Some of the goats are a bit ticklish. But you have to show them who's the boss. Otherwise, they'll run all over you.
Vreni Kadurish never trims their horns. She thinks the goats should remain as nature intended. Nature calls the shots on the picturesque peninsula. Barely inhabited, car-free. Nevertheless, even today enough customers make their way to the little Kashchina, where it still looks like it did 200 years ago. When the milk starts to simmer, Vreni Kadurish has to watch out for just the right moment to add the ideal amount of sour milk. That's because the milk's composition varies from day to day, depending on whether the goats ate more herbs, leaves, or hay. It's important that the mascarpone always tastes the same.
Wir schützen ihn da mit Fliegengittern.
We then cover it with an insect screen to keep the flies out. But we also have to put up a coarser screen because we have weasels here. They somehow caught on that it's a nice treat and managed to get at it. First we thought it was cats, but then we saw one as it scurried off fast as a weasel, so we knew who the culprit was.
Wer dieser Übeltäter war.
Today, Lake Sills is more idyllic than its neighbouring lakes. Off and on, however, things looked pretty bleak for the lake. In 1944, the communities needed inexpensive electricity and were hoping to build a hydro power plant. Environmentalists were dismayed. Initially, a peaceful solution was not in sight, even though it was dawning on more and more locals that an ugly dam and a strong drop in the water level would be disastrous. Even back then, many families made their living from visiting nature enthusiasts. But the power companies promised large sums of money for power plant building permits. At the last moment, environmentalists came up with an idea that saved the day. They persuaded the War Office on Food to release 20 tons of milk chocolate to protect their hometown. They pressed it into round forms and covered it in tin foil. The Shoggy-Taler, or chocolate coin, was born. To this day, school children sell them year for year to raise money for environmental purposes.
Good afternoon. Would you like to buy a few Shoggy-Taler? Yes, with pleasure.
Right from the start, the Shoggy-Taler was a runaway success. Revenues from chocolate sales filled the municipal coffers, and this sparked renewed and serious debate about the dam project. Attilio Bevetti was still a child at that time. He remembers that families in Sills were deeply divided over the power plant project.
Sils war damals wirklich
Sils was a bitterly poor town back then. Even keeping up its basic infrastructure was difficult. The community benefited from this Schoggitaler campaign. It received 100,000 Swiss francs, a huge sum of money in those days. The sum that the power company had promised was much higher. Even so, they decided to put their lake under protection.
The coat of arms heralds sunshine and fish. The Nietzsche house holds out the promise of inspiration. And the environment beckons with adventures in pure nature. Nevertheless, the very existence of the town of Sils, with its age-old houses and its decorative limestone sgraffitos, has always been under threat. Usually, Fex Creek meanders quite peacefully for 10 kilometers through the valley in the direction of the lake. It only becomes hazardous during storms or during the snowmelt period. It drains a huge area, roughly 34 square kilometers. When he's not out fishing, Fadri Pedroon is an employee for the waterworks. He knows exactly when the languid creek will turn into a raging torrent. Fadri only knows about the ominous floods that regularly visited the village from the stories of townfolk. That's because even before he was born, the community had a tunnel system built to keep the destructive water masses in check. However, there were times when Fex Creek could hardly be tamed.
A few years ago, the fire brigade was sent out to the creek when it was once again at the verge of flooding. They tried to pull the iron H-beams through the connectors. Of course, the water pushes with enormous force. When a colleague tried it, he was flung into the air. That's how incredibly powerful the water is.
Extreme weather strikes the Alps more and more often, even in the summer. Torrential downpours expose the slopes to mudslides and turn creeks into raging rivers. When Fex Creek thunders downhill at 18 cubic meters per second, it's important to stop it from flowing uninhibited into the village through the narrow section. Instead, the water needs to be guided to the steep outlet leading to the lake. Today, Fadri wants to inspect the tunnel system. He abseils down the shaft like an Alpine mountaineer.
Sure, if I become unsteady and lose my footing, I would definitely break some bones. It's a long way down.
In 1970, the commune of Sils blasted a tunnel into the bedrock. Thus far, it's always lived up to its purpose. Up to 10 times a year. Most recently, however, it rained very heavily. Fadri needs to inspect the tunnel system for damage. A large boulder has detached itself from the entrance area. The water swept it along for several meters.
Der allerschlimmste Fall wäre, wenn man natürlich mit Baumstämmen und vielleicht auch
It is, of course, dangerous when tree trunks or rock slides narrow the tunnel. The thundering rush of water that drains into it gets backed up within seconds and causes a problem up above.
Fadri discovers further damage as well. After some 50 years, the town will have to invest in some restoration work on the tunnel. Fadri is fascinated by the 500-meter-long cave landscape deep below the rock, including the reward at the end, a true experience of nature. In Upper Engadine, moist air can only come from the southwest because of the high mountains. Lightning occurs there where it collides with cold glacial winds, and the village of San Jan is located right beneath this swathe of air. In 1682, a storm destroyed the church roof for the first time. At one point, the villagers decided to leave the roof as it was. To this day, just about every nearby tree is scarred by lightning. The queen of the Alps, the Swiss stone pine, grows near the snow line. It faces permanent threat from snow, lightning, storms or avalanches that snap the treetops off. The Swiss stone pine is adept at dealing with this situation. Side shoots will start to sprout fairly quickly. Impressive so-called weather trees result. Today, Dennis Brunner, a chef, is out and about with amateur botanist Jan Klaluna as they look for an old Swiss stone pine. High up on the hill, the woods with a special kind of magic harnessed from nature elicits their amazement. Snow has fallen overnight, and now the sun is breaking through. Jan calls the phenomenon sweating forest. Every hiking path ends as a little creek. Just before reaching the ancient Swiss stone pine, Jan stops out of respect for the tree's age, estimated at 1,060 years.
To know that cold and windy weather prevails for 8 months at this altitude, and this is followed by 4 months of summer, which aren't necessarily warm. And this tree has withstood it all. Nature is truly amazing. 1,000 years old, and yet it still smells young. Those unfamiliar with the Swiss stone pine can't recognize the taste, but if you've tried it, you'll love it and want it again and again.
Dennis was actually planning to gather some ingredients.
Yes, it's amazing. It's age. Something that old deserves to be left alone. We'll leave it be.
Dennis is now gathering young shoots for his pesto elsewhere. He even finds some rare Swiss stone pine nuts on this comparatively young tree. A tree has to be 60 or older to produce them, and usually they only grow high up in the tree's crown.
Die sind ganz, was dort sind. Und die kannst du essen.
Here, try one. This has an altogether different taste. Slightly resiny. It's much more delicate than a walnut. They're hard to find, a true rarity.
Even the famous Engadine nut cake used to be made with pine nuts. Like the Swiss stone pine with its viscous cell sap, the Alpine ibex too is a master of survival. It lowers its heartbeat by about 60%. Towards the end of the 19th century, the ibex was extinct in the Alps. In the meantime, their numbers are growing nicely. Full-grown, they no longer have any natural enemies. Daniel Godley protects his ibex anyway from unnatural enemies.
A helicopter, if it keeps a certain distance, doesn't bother them. Paragliders are the second most common aircraft here, but I've noticed that they cause the ibex to flee a greater distance than if they hear a shot.
Now, for the first time, Godley wants to test how ibex react to drones. Helicopters may only land with his permission. Paragliding is forbidden because, especially in winter when food supplies are depleted, expending energy to flee leaves the animals vulnerable.
It's so unusual to see something like this in the air. Who knows? Maybe they will have gotten used to it in 50 years. But for now it's disastrous. They're completely unfamiliar with drones, and everything I've seen points to very dramatic consequences. Helicopters, on the other hand, aren't much of a problem.
Dennis Brunner, in the meantime, has prepared his Swiss stone pine pesto. Catering for a concert, plus a few culinary delights. On a glacier whose tongue, just a few years ago, still reached deep into the valley. The dying glacier now needs our help, if you ask Felix Keller. Together with glaciologists, friends and colleagues, he performs with his music ensemble, the Swiss Ice Fiddlers and Tango Glacier. Dennis Brunner has to rush back to the Grand Hotel. He leaves behind the food he prepared from the fruits of the local landscape. Alpine rose jelly, Swiss stone pine pesto, and bread with the goat milk mascarpone cheese. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And as Felix Keller hopes, people tend to protect the things they love. Global warming is having a stronger impact on the jagged alpine landscape. That's because glaciers reflect light. And when they melt, this effect will be lost, and the Earth's surface will heat up more quickly. Since the end of the 19th century, the Morteratsch Glacier has lost a quarter of its length. His violin reacts with discord over climate change, just like the glaciologist. But an out-of-tune violin can easily be fixed, whereas the remedy for fast-melting glaciers is elusive.
Letting oneself get dragged down by negative thoughts is counterproductive for climate protection, because this has a paralyzing effect. We want to think positive, create positive musical associations, and enjoy the glacier's presence. There are so many possibilities, and we hope that we can make a contribution with our music.
A call for more harmony between mankind and nature at an altitude of 3,000 meters, for a glacier that keeps getting smaller. Fire and ice created all of this, and even today still produces impressive images, although the proportion of grey keeps getting bigger.